You got the professor and Patty One. We've already had a pretty good discussion.
Yeah, I had.
Word.
He didn't know what Gehenna was.
Yeah, you have to. And it's not the sausages either. Well, that's Vienna. Sausages.
That's like I said Gehenna, not.
Gehenna. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
It starts with a G, not with a V.
Yep. So, we are continuing our Harmony of the Gospels, and David, I believe we have a transition.
Yep. Jesus has been arrested. He's fixed to be hauled off to the Sanhedrin. He says, and that's the title of the transition. Trial before the Sanhedrin. Now, following his arrest, Jesus underwent 2 trials, one before the Sanhedrin and a second before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The Sanhedrin, the high Jewish council, was given complete freedom by the Roman government over religious affairs and limited freedom in political affairs. It consisted of 70 elders and scribes who could be either Sadducees or Pharisees, plus a presider known as the high priest, who was elected annually to renewable terms in office. Jesus was hauled before the Sanhedrin on the false charges of plotting to overthrow the temple. The Synoptic Gospels record a hearing before Caiaphas, who was high priest from AD 18 to 36, whereas John records a preliminary hearing before Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Jesus remained silent until pressed by the high priest to answer whether he was the Son of God or not. And according to Mark, Jesus affirmed the question. Yet even the ambiguous responses recorded by Matthew and Luke are not a denial of the question, since they were understood as blasphemy deserving of death. All 4 Gospels intertwine Peter's courtyard experience with Sanhedrin trial, contrasting the faithful confession of Jesus with the denial by Peter. Jesus' hearing in the high priest's house permitted him a view of Peter standing in the courtyard. The 4th Gospel appears to base its knowledge of the trial, in part at least, on the other disciple, which may refer to the Apostle John. Otherwise, all disciples had fled, and their absence may account for the greater divergences in the Gospels reports of the trial.
This is a pretty good story here, which, I mean, denying Jesus and all. Peter denies.
Antichrist.
Huh?
They were the Antichrist.
Who?
Caiaphas.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. See, I knew we could tie it in somehow. Okay, so Matthew.
No, that's that. That wasn't the hell part.
Yeah, true. So Matthew chapter 26. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death. But no one found even let's see. Well, but found none, even though many false witnesses came forward, and they found none. But at least 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days," which is true, right? Now, it's interesting. Well,
Yeah, he was thinking about the physical temple, not the Jesus's
yeah,
temple.
right. Well, let's see what it
I think
says.
Jesus called himself a temple.
Yeah, exactly. And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent, and the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Uh-oh, David. There's your clouds again.
Yeah, but this could mean in judgment,
Yeah,
not just a second coming or anything like that,
yeah,
but of judgment.
exactly. Now, the high priest tore his clothes, saying, "He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have to have a witness? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered and said, "He is deserving of death." Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you." Now, so we got,
It's like tempting God again.
yeah, we got people that claim they know Christ, right? But what did they do? They said, "You claim that you can rebuild the temple in 3 days," right? They're quoting what he said,
Yeah.
right? Satan quoted scripture too, right? In the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
the temptation of Jesus, and
But see, they took it literally.
they took it literally.
This is the stone temple, Herod's temple
Right.
that he built,
Yes.
not the body of Jesus.
Right.
Of course, resurrection to them was far apart. They didn't see that too often in them days.
Right.
More happened in Jesus' time period than any other time.
Right. But who do we know? We mentioned him earlier. That can quote Jesus the way that Satan did.
Earlier.
Yeah. Well, they're Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, they can sound like Christians, but they really aren't.
Well, these
Now,
this body here could quote scripture.
exactly. That's the whole point.
The whole Sanhedrin probably.
Yeah, that's the whole point
The
of it.
scribes probably better than anybody.
Yep. Oh wait. So let's go to 69. Go ahead.
That coffee pretty good.
It is Christmas coffee.
I do not know the man. Now Peter sat outside in a courtyard, and the servant girl came to him saying, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you're saying." And then he had gone out in the gateway And another girl saw him and said to those who were there, this fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And a little later, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, surely you are also one of them, but your speech betrays you. Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So he went out and wept bitterly.
So,
Kind of take it hard when the prophecy came true.
yeah. But you know,
You gotta see it firsthand.
in his mind, he's probably thinking, well, it can't be me because I'm one of his followers. I'm one of his faithful followers, you know. But I don't know. It's all interesting to me. So, are we doing Mark or doing Mark last?
We'll do Mark last.
Mark last. Okay. So Luke chapter 22, starting verse 54. Oh, and it says, having arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house, but Peter followed at a distance. Now, when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard, they sat down together, and Peter sat among them. And a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked immediately at him and said, this man also was with him. But he denied him, saying, woman, I do not know him. In a little while, another saw him and said, you also are of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. So here's Peter, again, one of Jesus' close disciples, betraying him, right? But Jesus also told him, right, that
was a prophecy.
that you're going to betray me.
Yep.
And it's like, you know, do you think that Peter at that point in time was really thinking, I would never betray him? But whenever he's put on the spot,
I think it leaked up on him.
yes. Yes. Anyway, but do you think that he knew that was going to happen?
No, that's what I'm saying. See, when you read the next verse, you see that the three denials weren't right behind each other
Yeah.
in a matter of minutes.
Right.
It was a matter of time, a length of time.
Yeah, length of time. Exactly, yeah. Let's see. Then after about an hour he had passed, and another confidently affirmed, saying, surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are saying. Immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the words of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly.
Well, that's rough, denying him 3 times, and he's right there, he can see you do it.
He's just standing right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Heard that rooster crow, he looked over at him. I guess Peter's mouth dropped to the floor.
And then Jesus said,
I told you so.
I told you so. I told you. Yeah. So what are some key differences between Matthew and Luke. So far.
They started off with Peter first and Luke.
Yes.
And last in Matthew.
Yes.
So is this going to be reversed?
No, yeah. Could be. Okay, verse 63. Now the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him. Having blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is the one who struck you? And many other things they blasphemously spoke against him. So as soon as it was day, the elders of people, both chief priests and scribes, came together and led him into their council, saying, If you are the Christ, tell us. Yeah, did you have anything to say?
We're going backwards in Matthew.
Yep, backwards. Luke.
I know, Luke is going backwards in Matthew.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. But he said, if I tell you, you will by no means believe, and if I ask you, you will by no means answer me, or let me go. Hereafter, the Son of Man will sit at the right hand of the power of God. So they all said, You are then the Son of God? So he said to them, You rightly say that I am. And they said, What further testimony do we need? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth. So, it's kind of like, he claims to be the Son of God. So, it's kind of like, hey, he is the Son of God. I mean, it's like, there's really no way out of it. I mean, I guess you could say that he's done all these miracles, and they could say that it's like sorcery, right? Or, I will never forget. I led worship with a band, and David, when you lead worship, you get to see some behind the scenes stuff. I could not believe what I heard. What I heard is this guy gets Jim, George, Martha, Philip, and whoever. Said, you, and you have a broke leg. Here's your wheelchair, and you're blind or you're deaf or something, and you're so on and so forth. And during the service, they would call out Phil in the wheelchair and wheel him, and he'll blow on him or whisper.
Get up and walk.
Whisper to him and get up and walk. Yeah, and it's the same thing here. It's crazy to see, because I don't know. I just find it all very in-stream. Okay,
Yeah,
John.
Luke's a little more generalized than Matthew.
Right.
When Jesus said, "Where hereafter the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God," he didn't include what Matthew said. He said that and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew didn't include that.
Right.
Of course, it doesn't say anything about Caiaphas ripping his clothes off either.
Yeah.
So it's more generalized. It ain't really
Right.
as detailed as Matthew is.
All right, which brings us to John. You got John?
Yeah, here's John right here.
Go ahead.
His name is John. Yeah, in this one, it starts off, he's before Annas.
Yes.
I think that's the priest before. Well, let's read this verse 12 through 14. And then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jew arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. I remember that. I remember hearing saying that in one of the movies.
Chosen?
There may have been, but I think it was just another movie, a regular movie too, instead of a series. But what was the importance of bringing him to Annas first?
I don't know.
I mean, that might be the only time he's mentioned.
Right, well, Annas was who, though?
Caiaphas, his father-in-law.
Right. So, I don't know. Could it be that Annas would be like, because they knew deep down he was, well, they knew deep down nothing. They knew he was innocent, right? So, do you think that Annas might be
Nah,
a little more lenient than his father-in-law, maybe?
nah.
I don't know.
That brings me to a question.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
Well, you know, only Levi can be a priest.
Okay.
Well, if his father-in-law must have been a Levite. So, can Levites marry outside of their tribe?
I don't think in their culture you couldn't.
I don't know. Of course, you've got hundreds of years going on.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like,
It's kind of like, okay, you gotta say it. David, you pushed me to it.
I told you so?
No. No. It's kind of like, you know, way back then, I don't want to anger anybody, but back then, you know, the whites and the blacks were segregated. But did you know, David? I told you. I guess it is kind of that thing.
Actually,
I've never met a black man. I've never met a white man. Look,
you're gonna pull that again.
look. I told you, this is black. I've never met anyone that color. This is white. I've never. I am not white.
Guess what? I'm colorblind, and he can't help me out with that.
Oh, you're colorblind?
No, I'm just giving you a point that even the colorblind don't know the difference between black and white.
Oh, that's actually a good point. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just find it all interesting. Okay, read 15 through 18, and I'll finish it out.
Okay. Okay, one man should die for the people. It's kind of like one of them Star Trek movies.
Yeah.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And here we go. First off, he's starting with the denial here. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciples, who was known by the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Then the servant girls who kept the door said to Peter, You are not also one of the man's disciples, are you? And he said, I am not. Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself.
It's kind of like what you said earlier. You got your little gap. That was, you see, there's another chunk of verses here. And then it's
You go back down here. It says Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Now, usually when John writes about that other disciple, he's talking about himself.
Yeah.
So he's the youngest of the bunch, and he knows the high priest.
Wow. Yeah, that's true.
But still, he had no effect on Jesus' outcome.
You can't. You can't have an effect on his outcome.
Really,
Because prophecy had to be fulfilled. It doesn't matter.
well, it would seem like this woman, the lady that had the door to the courtyard,
Dead.
would know John was also one of his disciples.
Right. But God didn't. His Father didn't give him a pass or help him out. Nope. It's got to be done.
Yeah.
It's got to be done this way. It's kind of like one of those things where, you can't.
Well, so far, John's kept his mouth shut that he knew Jesus.
Yeah. Well.
He doesn't say that he was associated with Jesus in what we just read.
Right.
He's trying to get Peter in out of the courtyard into the inside. And then they hear this girl, you're one of his disciples.
Yep.
But she didn't recognize John. Just like you said.
True. Well, John probably
It's
could have been out
directed.
there.
It's directed to Peter
Yeah.
for that prophecy to be fulfilled.
Right. And you know what? If they went into the synagogue, it would have happened in there. It had to have happened.
So it's going to be interesting to see what more this other disciple has to say.
Yep. And like he said, this disciple is indeed John. Because if you read the Gospel of John, it doesn't say I John like he does in Revelation. He says
other disciple.
He says, or the one that Jesus loved. Little
And
cool
he did say that too. Jesus loved his
Bible trivia there. Okay. So the high priest in verse 19, the high priest asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world, and I always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always meet. And in secret, I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me and what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with his palm, with the palm of his hand, saying, do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, I have spoken evil. If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound Caiaphas, the high priest.
Whoa.
What?
So he's before Annas when all this is going on.
That's what. Yeah, that's it.
So far, he hasn't said the same thing as he has said in Matthew and Luke about that he'll be on the right hand side of God of the power.
Yep.
But guess who's got front row seat?
John.
So whose story you think would be more correct?
John. Well, that's a bad term to use. More correct, because again, if
Well, Matthew and Luke have to write this from hearsay.
yeah,
Now, did Matthew talk to John and ask him what happened? Maybe. And
Oh.
maybe.
and I actually have an answer for this. All scripture is God breathed, right? But we understand that that's talking about the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
But even when Paul is writing that, they're still not. They're not in the Old Testament times, but they're still in the Old Testament. Then he says all Old Testament until
Church.
Revelation, until
Church.
the church. Yeah. So it's all. So all of this
It's in the 490 years that Daniel prophesied.
is okay. We're moving on. All of this is God breathed. So if there's one, it doesn't matter if a monkey wrote this.
Well,
It
what I'm getting at
It is God's preserved word.
Here's what I'm getting at is here. This guard strikes him
Yes.
because of the way he talked back. Now, also, this is the only place where Annas is being referenced.
Yes.
The others is Caiaphas.
Yes.
So, if that's the case, Jesus may be getting slapped twice
Right.
in two different places.
Right.
One in front of Annas and another at Caiaphas.
Well, let's say 4 people wrote a biography on you. Right.
I'm full of myself. That's the title of it.
Yeah. Your mom, Margaret, your sons. Well, yeah, that's 4, right? So they all will have 4 different positions,
Or different stories on the same
different
subject.
stories on the same subject.
Yeah.
So that's all it is. I mean, sure, John might have had a front row seat to it, but that isn't really.
Well, what I'm getting at, I mean, like I said earlier, just a few minutes ago, this is happening before Annas, whereas the other 2 we read, I believe it's happening before Caiaphas, because he's the one that ran his clothes in Matthew.
Yes.
So, what I'm saying is that Matthew
Oh.
and Luke has left out the first part of the story, which the guy with the front row seat had put in.
Let's finish this out and get a mark, and I got something to say. Let's go. Because there's something interesting about that. But we'll say that to the very end. Okay. Now Simon Peter stood and warned him. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Okay, I was reading that right. Therefore, they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him, his ear Peter cut off. Did I not see you in the garden with him? Like, hey, David. Kind of saying, you're the one that cut off my ear. That's what I would have said. You know?
Front row seat. John sitting there.
We're coming to that. Yeah, because that's interesting.
John picked him out.
Yep.
This guy that cut Peter's ear off.
Yeah.
You one of them. You cut my ear off.
And Peter then denied again, and immediately the rooster crowed. Let's get to Mark, and we'll go down deep, stay down long, and come up dry on because I found something interesting. Let's do Luke, Mark.
Well, okay. What I'm looking at here, Luke goes the opposite direction of Matthew when they're going in order.
Yes.
He does Luke does the denial of Peter.
Right.
But here Jesus he does the Sanhedrin. He's mocked and beaten. He prophesy which one to hit you.
Mhm.
And so Matthew starts out the trial before Caiaphas. And I think he's, let's see. I think he's the one that tells where he rents his clothes. So you see, keep it quiet in front of Caiaphas. But he pretty much talked in front of Annas.
Right. Well, let's get Mark then. Oh,
And
Mark.
then the high priest tore his clothes, saying he has spoken blasphemy. So I'm trying to get a picture here. Matthew, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. So far, what we got from John, he's before Annas. He's not before Caiaphas. And whereas Matthew and Luke, he never comes before Annas. He's before Caiaphas.
Right, yes.
So what I'm wondering is, if John knew the high priest, this can't be talking about Caiaphas. He has to be talking. He knew who Annas was. So, but then you don't hear anything about John when Jesus is before Caiaphas. So I'm assuming.
True.
I'm assuming John didn't get to that one. And Peter must not have too, because this denial has to come. Looks like it came before he was brought in before Caiaphas.
Right.
So, do we take a break?
I was about to see if you wanted to take a break or just jump right into it.
Yeah, let's take a break and we will be
Right back.
We'll pick up with Mark. Let's see what he has to say about the subject.